I have no money, no resources, no hopes. I am the happiest man alive. A year ago, 6 months ago, I thought that I was an artist. I no longer think about it. I am. Everything that was literature has fallen from me. There are no more books to be written, thank God. This then? This is not a book. This is libel, slander, defamation of character. This is not a book in the ordinary sense of the word. No, this is a prolonged insult, a glob of spit in the face of art, a kick in the pants of God, man, destiny, time, love, beauty, what you will. I am going to sing for you, a little off key perhaps, but I will sing. I will sing while you croak. I will dance over your dirty corpse. To sing, you must first open your mouth. You must have a pair of lungs and a little knowledge of music. It is not necessary to have an accordion or a guitar. The essential thing is to want to sing. This, then, is a song. I am singing.
She's gonna get, maybe not for long. She's gonna get, and it's gone.
Welcome to Positive Read-Ins. That was the famous opening to Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. This novel was published in Paris in 1934. It was banned in America and the UK and probably some other countries until 1964, when Supreme Court ruled that it was not a work of pornography, but actually a work of art, and this allowed it to be purchased freely in the US. As you'll see, reading this novel, it is a strange novel. It's a dirty novel in places. It's an angry novel, and in many ways, it doesn't even seem like a novel. It has no plot. It does have a clear character, and he's just kind of going through a number of incidences in Paris. Some of them are definitely episodic and interesting, and you get caught up in this little drama, this little story, but then it fades and it jumps to another one. So that's, I'm not even going to try to sum up this story, what it's about in that sense, and I'm just going to try to look at some passages that highlight the writing style, because I think that's the real grab of this novel, but also some of the work that preceded it, that influenced it, some intertextual links for this, and also where this novel fits in the discipline of literature. Paul R. Jackson, writing in this essay, Henry Miller, Emerson, and the Divided Self, quotes from The Books in My Life, a later work by Henry Miller. He quotes a passage where he is trying to get at the style that Miller is aiming for in his early works, in Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. He calls this an autobiographical novel. Miller refers to something he calls autobiographical fact. So let me read this passage. The autobiographical novel, which Emerson predicted would grow in importance with time, has replaced the great confessions. And I believe that would be a reference to St. Augustine's Confessions, but maybe also Rousseau's and Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater. So the autobiographical novel Emerson predicted is going to replace the great confessions. It is not a mixture of truth and fiction, this genre of literature, but an expansion and deepening of truth. It is more authentic, more veridical, as in veracity, than the diary. It is not the flimsy truth of facts which the authors of these autobiographical novels offer, but the truth of emotion, reflection, and understanding, truth digested and assimilated. The being revealing himself does so on all levels simultaneously. So what Miller was aiming for here is what he calls the autobiographical truth, or the truth of emotion, which he thinks is more truthful than you would get in a story, and that's very much what you'll see in the Tropic of Cancer. It's Henry Miller, a fictionalized version, I hope, considering some of the things he does and ways he behaves, but it's supposed to be trying to capture the truth of emotion. I think we can see this today in today's art. It's not so much writers, at least not that I've read, U.S. writers, but other artists. So I think of, in stand-up comedy, Louis C.K., very much capturing this truth of emotion and autobiographical truth that I find more effective than a lot of fiction. And in songwriting, I would say Mark Kozelek, particularly in his albums Benji, I think that's 2014, and Universal Themes, which came out a few years after that. These songs are kind of like a Henry Miller book. They're very long. They talk about the minutia of that happens in the daytime, stuff that you would not think would be appropriate for a song, but there they are. It's just giving you everything. And that's pretty much what Henry Miller is doing. He is taking things that would not traditionally be appropriate for a novel, and he's just putting it all out there. Stylistically, Stephen Foster, in his essay, A Critical Appraisal of Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, connects Henry Miller to Nathaniel West. Also, in a passage I'll read here, he says, in matters of style, Miller can be justly identified with both Whitman and Melville. That's Walt Whitman and Henry Melville, a writer of Moby Dick. Their structures are essentially formless. They are portmanteau writers, discursive, rambling, and prolix. Vulnerable in matters of form because their visions are either too profound to be complete or left purposefully unfinished. Tropic of Cancer is large enough to include art theory, apocalyptic vision, Proustian memoir, mysticism, and philosophy of history, all invested with a tentative quality. So as he's stating here, and I would agree with this characterization of Miller's work, especially Tropic of Cancer, it's formless. It's kind of rambling. Some people call it a rant. I think that's not very the best way, not a generous way to describe it, but it is rambling, and it includes many different topics, as we have here: art theory, apocalyptic vision, Proustian memoir, mysticism, philosophy. It's all in this book. Lots going on, and definitely taking cues. Miller was taking cues from Walt Whitman, certainly in his style, kind of poet, seeing the beauty in everything, the poetry in the common life, but also in Herman Melville's work in the sense of a formless, just starts at A, finishes at B, no real design in between. How would Miller respond to these comparisons? I would imagine that he would enjoy or appreciate being compared to Melville and Walt Whitman. Yet at the same time, in that opening that I read, the beginning of this novel, we see that the novel is starting from this place of rejecting the Harold Bloom's anxiety of influence, this idea of that other works are shaping what you're doing, and trying to reject that and say, okay, I'm not going to try to be an artist. I'm just going to be one, and I'm just going to write about what I want to write about in my life. Another scene later in the novel, there is an episode near the end of this novel where Henry Miller goes to live in Dijon. He's not very, does not like it. He's not very generous in his descriptions of Dijon. But he talks here about literature, capital L literature. He says, I had plenty of time on my hands and not a sou to spend. 2 or 3 hours of conversational lessons a day, and that was all. And what use was it, teaching these poor bastards English? I felt sorry as hell for them. all morning plugging away on John Gilpin's Ride, and in the afternoon coming to me to practice a dead language. I thought of the good time I had wasted reading Virgil or wading through such incomprehensible nonsense as Herman und Dorothy. The insanity of it, learning the empty breadbasket. So empty breadbasket is what he's calling so-called great literature. I thought of Carl, that's one of his friends who's obsessed with Faust. I thought of Carl, who can recite Faust backwards, who never writes a book without praising the shit out of his immortal, incomparable Goethe. And yet, he hadn't sense enough to take on a rich cunt and get himself a change of underwear. And as you can see, the word cunt is used a lot in this book, which explains why it was banned for so long. There's something obscene in this love of the past, which ends in bread lines and dugouts. Something obscene about this spiritual racket, which permits an idiot to sprinkle holy water over Big Berthas and dreadnoughts and high explosives. Every man with a belly full of the classics is an enemy to the human race. Enemy to the human race, that's where he's looking at people who are reading the classics. Again, I think this is all part of this kind of bravado of the Henry Miller fictional character, probably part of the real character as well, to reject everything that came before him and just go out into the world with something completely new, completely individual. So this definitely makes Henry Miller an uber-American in many ways. Speaking of obscenity and individualism, Charles Glicksberg, in his essay Henry Miller, Individualism in Extremis, writes about why Miller is focused so much on the obscene and sexuality. And this is what he has to say. There is the obscene horror that must be faced. Whatever sex may produce, it is at least alive, but inertia, inaction, paralysis of the will, these are worse than death. That is the fate of man, to endure the crucifixion of sex. There is no other way out. That is Miller's justification for seeking to portray a world of natural men and women, a world of passion, dreams, perversions, madness, drama, horror. And it seems like Glicksberg is taking on some of Miller's style here as well. The goal is not merely to describe the biological instinct of sex, but to deal with it objectively, truthfully, creatively. The most damning indictment of Miller's work, apart from the moral issue, is that those parts given over to sex are a dreadful bore, as dull as the run-of-the-mill pornographic fiction. And I would like to just comment here that while I would agree with this statement, thankfully this novel does not go into a great detail of the sexual act. So even though there is some dirty talk in it, this is not, this is not a romance, kind of cheap romance novel in the descriptions that we're getting here. What saves these passages from being completely worthless is the personality of the author. Life-loving, earth-rooted, honest in his convictions, intensely creative. Though he sexualizes the universe, there are rewarding moments when the artist uncovers his inner secret, attempts to justifying his life and work. And there is no mistaking the power and beauty of his utterance, even if we are irritated by his obtrusive and irresponsible individualism. And again, I would agree with this. Certain parts of this book you're reading and you're thinking, why am I reading these details? And you almost want to give it up, but then suddenly he'll have these reflections on, as he says here, sexualize the universe are rewarding moments when the artist uncovers an inner secret. And you'll get that uncovering of an inner secret and some insight into the world, and you think, wow, this is actually quite beautiful, the write-in. So I went from kind of depravity into some magical, almost philosophical, poetic writing. Much of this novel is a meditation, a deep description of city life, Paris in particular, and mankind that's like a disease that's on steep decline. Here's an example of a passage like that also, I think, captures some of that inner revealing of an inner secret or some poetic writing that was mentioned in the previous passage. It is that sort of cruelty which is embedded in the streets. It is that which stares out from the walls and terrifies us when suddenly we respond to a nameless fear, when suddenly our souls are invaded by a sickening panic. It is that which gives the lampposts their ghoulish twists, which makes them beckon to us and lure us to their strangling grip. It is that which makes certain houses appear like the guardians of secret crimes, and their blind windows like the empty sockets of eyes that have seen too much. It is that sort of thing written into the human physiognomy of the streets which makes me flee when overhead I suddenly see inscribed, "Impasse Satan." That which makes me shudder when at the very entrance to the mosque I observe that it is written, "Mondays and Thursdays, tuberculosis, Wednesdays and Fridays, syphilis." In every metro station, there are grinning skulls that greet you with "Défendez-vous contre la syphilis." Apologies for my French pronunciation. Wherever there are walls, there are posters with bright, venomous crabs heralding the approach of cancer. No matter where you go, no matter what you touch, there is cancer and syphilis. It is written in the sky, in flames and dances, like an evil portent. It has eaten into our souls, and we are nothing but a dead thing, like the moon. This theme of American life or modern life being like a cancer or a disease is talked about by Harold McCarthy in his essay Henry Miller's Democratic Vistas. And he traces this back to Oswald Spengler, who wrote The Decline of the West, and also Friedrich Nietzsche. So here he says, Spengler observed, quote, "It is not products that influence, but creators that absorb." This perception describes aptly Miller's use of books, although the autobiographical material of the Tropics might suggest otherwise. Even in the Paris years, he was an avid reader and absorbed much of what he read into his creative process. The growth of his theme of the disease of American life found rich nourishment in the prophecies of Western culture made by Nietzsche and Spengler. Civic decay, he discovered, had been richly imagined by the French symbolist poets Joyce, Proust, Lawrence, that would be D.H. Lawrence, Céline, all were converted to use in Miller's varied denunciations. A civilization was dying, and Miller said bad cess to it in hundreds of pages, purportedly dealing with Shakespeare's Hamlet. The prospect of the decline and fall of America was to Miller something to be regarded with great joy, for only through its suffering and death could America be reborn. And I think that's an important point. A lot of the writing in Tropic of Cancer seems nihilistic, seems depraved, seems like it's getting pleasure out of this waywardness. And it is. And the idea, though, is that through that suffering, America will be reborn. Miller will be reborn. Miller was fond of a quote that he took from Jacob Boehme, which was, "He who does not die before he dies will be ruined when he dies." And this idea that one must suffer and die, a part of him, to be reborn into something else. So Miller had to die as this middle-aged businessman in order to become the artist, the free kind of spirit, out-of-control artist in Paris that he became. There are many passages I could read in this novel. As I said, it doesn't have a strong plot, but it's full of great writing. It is entertaining. It is fairly fast-paced. A lot of passages like the ones I've already read with the streets and kind of the bleakness. But this novel is also very cosmopolitan. We have characters who are Indian, Chinese, all from all the different parts of Europe, Germans, French, and a lot of reflections on American life in the 1920s, early 1900s. And there's one passage that I thought is worth reading that it's this reflective Miller remembering his childhood. I could no longer follow his story. My mind had slipped back to a 4th of July when I bought my first package of firecrackers, and with it, the long pieces of punk which break so easily, the punk that you blow on to get a good red glow, the punk whose smell sticks to your fingers for days and makes you dream of strange things. The 4th of July, the streets are littered with bright red paper stamped with black and gold figures, and everywhere there are tiny firecrackers which have the most curious intestines, packages and packages of them, all strung together by their thin, flat little gut strings, the color of human brains. All day long there is the smell of powder and punk, and the gold dust from the bright red wrappers sticks to your fingers. One never thinks of China, but it is there all the time on the tips of your fingers, and it makes your nose itchy. And long afterwards, when you have forgotten almost what a firecracker smells like, you wake up one day with gold leafing choking you, and the broken pieces of punk waft back their pungent odor, and the bright red wrappers give you a nostalgia for a people and a soil you have never known, but which is in your blood, mysteriously there in your blood, like the sense of time or space, a fugitive, constant value to which you turn more and more as you get old, which you try to seize with your mind, but ineffectually, because in everything Chinese there is wisdom and mystery, and you can never grasp it with 2 hands or with your mind, but you must let it rub off, let it stick to your fingers, let it slowly infiltrate your veins. So here's a great example of Miller's writing where he is reflecting on a childhood memory, and yet he ties that into this sense of connectedness that we have to other nations that are producing these firecrackers, say in this case for America, and yet this is a country he knows very little about, but he has these, or imagines he has these connections with it. Undoubtedly, this would be the mysticism that some of the critics have talked about, but also, as I was saying, this cosmopolitanism that I see throughout Tropic of Cancer and also in Tropic of Capricorn, even though that's dealing more with life in New York. I'm going to give the last word to Henry Miller. What is this novel about? What is the aim here? Well, he tells us on page 205, so here it is. Once I thought that to be human was the highest aim a man could have, but I see now that it was meant to destroy me. Today, I am proud to say that I am inhuman, that I belong not to men and governments, that I have nothing to do with creeds and principles. I have nothing to do with the creaking machinery of humanity. I belong to the earth. I say that lying on my pillow, and I can feel the horns sprouting from my temples. I can see about me all those cracked forebears of mine dancing around the bed, consoling me, egging me on, lashing me with their serpent tongues, grinning and leering at me with their sulking skulls. I am inhuman. Sounds pretty terrifying and maybe off-putting, but I think you'll see if you explore the Tropic of Cancer, Henry Miller is actually far more human than he is claiming. Very human, maybe more human than many of us. Henry Miller, The Tropic of Cancer.